Hello, LeMaster Tech viewers. In today's video, I interview a game developer and fellow YouTuber Southpaw Development, and we discuss how to come up with ideas for new big projects, as well as the steps taken to develop and test and roll out those projects. So please enjoy this interview. All the links to any of the videos, channels, games, things that we talk about in this video should be linked in the description of this video below, as well as the channel for Southpaw Development. So I hope you enjoy this conversation, and feel free to throw a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of this and what you'd like to see next on the channel. Thanks, enjoy. Just how do you come up with game ideas?
Everything's ripping off someone else.
Right.
Taking mechanics, taking ideas that you know from stuff that you like, stuff that you're inspired by, and putting your own twist on it is a lot more of an approachable way of going about it than thinking you have to create something new and impressive from scratch.
How do you start implementing that? How do you put that into practice?
Now, one is where I start, and one is where I should start.
So how do you know when a project is done enough?
I think, that's deep and meaningful, I know, but I think that ultimately it's more rewarding the more work you put into it. I really hope it performs well, but I'm doing it because I'm passionate about the subject.
Of course. You just have to find something in that project that reminds you why you're doing it, and glom onto that piece and focus on that piece a little bit.
You need to love making it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. I guarantee you, your first idea will not be as fun as you thought it was, and it will not work out.
Yeah, probably true.
If you make a really successful game with your like $600 computer and free tools, and you get like thousands of dollars from that, that's all yours.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the mods I have installed is an assault couch. So instead of the normal vehicles, there'd be a couch that you can get 5 guys on, and it just flies around the map.
All right, so I guess first thing, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess I'll do the typical introduction. I'm George LeMaster, or online, I guess would be Southpaw Development. I recently graduated with a game development degree in computer science, so I'd like to think that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this. Yeah, but as far as like my content goes, I just try to be informational, informative, but funny, entertaining. Less technical, less your tutorial side, and more kind of entertainment.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a good point and worth bringing up. Why we're doing this is I've had several comments, and one of my Patreon supporters, Philip, have asked how I come up with ideas. And since basically my biggest, most successful projects that I've done on the channel are like Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, and chess, they're like existing projects. I haven't really felt like I could take credit for those being like original ideas,
I'd love to take credit for those, but
right. Yeah. So I do know a game developer, and I figured let's rope him in here and get his thoughts. And we should say we are related.
I am related to LeMaster Tech.
Yeah. So this is George, Southpaw Development on YouTube. His channel will be linked in the comments below, but he is my younger brother. And I thought it'd be really, really useful to bring him on here and talk to him about how, from his perspective, he comes up with new ideas, how he develops games technically, and get his thoughts from his side of things. And so a lot of people have thought this would be useful, and so that's what we're hoping to do here. All right, so George, let's start with the $1,000,000 question, which is how do you come up with game ideas?
Yeah, well, so there's kind of 2 aspects, right? One is just plain old creativity. And that's the unfortunate one, because that's one that you can't really teach.
Right.
I know that's not a great one to lead with, but 2 would be inspiration from existing works is a pretty big one. I guess sneak peek for those of you that wind up watching my channel or are combined. Currently, I'm working on the main game project I'm working on is a RTS, a turn-based RTS that would use deck building, that would use cards as your kind of unit management, as your deployment. And it feels like a super creative idea, but when I looked at it, it's kind of just combining Inscription and XCOM, which are 2 of my favorite games, which is probably why the idea appealed so much to me. So taking mechanics, taking ideas that you know from stuff that you like, stuff that you're inspired by, and putting your own twist on it is a lot more of an approachable way of going about it than thinking you have to create something new and impressive from scratch.
So I guess that's a really good point, and something that a lot of people coming from programming background should understand is like 100% of your idea doesn't have to be original. And so if you've thought, I want to do a game that's very similar to this other thing with one twist, don't be afraid of doing that because you think it's a ripoff, right?
Everything's ripping off someone else.
Right. Everything's ripping off someone else. My channel, like I said, my biggest projects are like, oh, I want to recreate Pac-Man or Donkey Kong or chess. Right. And so it's like, you can't spend all day being worried that something looks.
But you're informative. You're educational. You're allowed to do that.
Okay. Well, I appreciate I have the Southpaw Development sign off. But I do think that's an important point because natural creativity might not be everyone's wheelhouse.
Right. You're not look at this cool thing I came up with. You're like, let's recreate this.
Yeah, and actually I think that's more common with programmers than not. Like I think we're math-oriented people. But I do think it's actually probably really helpful for a lot of people to hear from a game developer that natural-born creativity instilled in you already isn't the only path towards game creation and coming up with an idea.
And as I've picked up from just being forced to create stuff on a schedule in school, you can force it a little bit, but you kind of have to do. And this is for if you're not a creative person but you want to create something.
Sure.
Force yourself to go way, way, way out there into the depths of like just abstract random ideas, and then try to connect them to a well-established thing. Try to connect just the most random stuff you can think of to an existing game, and you'll usually meet somewhere in the middle with a half-functioning idea.
Yeah.
And if you don't, just try it again.
Yeah, no, that's true in engineering as well. There's this thing in the early stages of a project, particularly with any kind of R&D role, called like a blue sky weekend, where nothing's off limits, just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And yeah, it's usually blue sky development, but then you have to bring those ideas, list it out, kind of back to work on Monday, present them to your team. And like the first thing is this feasible, right? Like
even doable? Yeah.
Right, exactly. Is this doable? Is this even something we should pursue further? Or was it okay to come up with this crazy idea, but now we need to move on? And I think that's something interesting. Even non-creative in a traditional sense, people can come up with wild ideas and then later you figure out if they're doable.
Yeah. You don't have to be creative to create. It does help though.
I like that. You don't have to be creative to create. It's absolutely true, but it's undeniable that it helps. But okay, so the next big question is not just how do you come up with the idea, I guess, but you have the idea. How do you start implementing that? How do you put that into practice?
Now, all right. I'd like to give two answers. One is where I start, and one is where I should start. Where I start is I typically jump into Engine, jump into the IDE, and try to make that mechanic that I had in mind. And then about halfway through, I'm like, it's good enough, and then I try to make it look good. Where I should start, and what I've done for some of my more important projects, and has unfortunately paid off, is put it down on paper. And I realize as much as it sucks to write things down on paper and how adverse we are to it as programmers,
yeah, of course,
putting your idea down on paper, having an actual physical representation of it and how the things piece together before you get in and make it helps so much. In the RTS I'm working on right now, it needs a flow field and a map and all of this kind of garbage to have units work around the map.
Okay.
Never having made one of these before, I jumped in and started making it. And I have something working now, but I've rewritten it almost 3 times. If I had written it on paper, I would have seen how they pieced together. If it's something small, if it is just a mechanic, just something cool you thought of, get into the engine and make it. And see how it works and learn from there. That's a great way to learn, and there's nothing against it. But if you're really intent on building it into something larger, future-proofing a little bit by actually putting it on paper is the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guilty of learning by doing as well. I love to learn by doing. But would you say in the industry, like in school with formal projects, the documentation and putting things on paper was typically the expected route of you? Or were most of your assignments based primarily off the end result where I guess as long as the playability and the functionality that you deliver at the end is there and fun to play, in a world like game development, are they digging into your process that much and looking for the rough draft? Or is it standard to just say, look, it's a fun game, right? Like, that's okay.
Well, so that's interesting that you ask that, because the games industry, creating something of this scale of a game, is very much so a meticulous, crafted, beginning to end process. Anything you do at the beginning will affect you in the end.
Of course.
However, the result is all people care about. So if you, largely, yes, in the games industry, in the professional environment, you need to have pre-planning, planning, everything in between. You should know exactly what you're doing before you touch a line of code. However, results are what matters.
Yeah.
So if your boss comes to you and you're like, you did none of this documentation, that's not great. You should have done the documentation. However, if you turn your screen around and you're like, but I built it, I can't speak for all companies, but in my experience, that's largely what's mattered most.
Yeah.
They'll be like, listen, you need to do the paperwork, you need to do the documentation. What if this hadn't been successful? What if this hadn't worked? What if you had failed?
But it did work.
That's the important part.
Yeah.
But if you're confident and you can do it, results are more important than documentation, but do the documentation.
Yeah. No, it is interesting because I think it's probably the only like STEM field where maybe you can get away that much with like a here's the end product, don't worry about the process too much. Because like for me with my job, if I do a project and the industrial controls work that I do, the code that I write, or the electronic panel that I design works, that's not enough on its own, because these are things we're ongoing, we're servicing these over time, and so the next person who has to come back and work on it is counting on meticulous documentation or following a site standard. And so, yes, the technical work that I get to do as an engineer is the most important part, but documentation and keeping tabs on things is like a very close second.
Right. Now, like I said, I can't speak to the entire industry, but something that may differ from just generic software development or systems engineering like you do and games is that, especially right now, game studios are so volatile that people are leaving, people are coming in.
High turnover.
Constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, week over week over week, the personnel is changing. By the end of the project, you could have entirely different people from the beginning.
Yeah.
And so that's where documentation is very important, and having stuff like an agreed upon code format and naming scheme and stuff like that.
Style.
Because you want new people to know what they're doing. You want somebody who has no idea what this project is about to be able to take a day, take a couple hours, look at the documentation,
get started,
and know the direction they're going in. That's why pretty common is stuff like a Trello board. I don't know if you've used Trello or heard of it. It's virtual just whiteboard. They put post-it notes on, move around in categories to be like, hey, what we're working on, what is done, what needs to be reviewed. Descriptions, write-ups. You want to be very thorough. And I won't pretend that I haven't slacked on this and gotten away with it.
Yeah.
But I know that the professional in me knows that this is the way to go.
So Trello's like a informal GitHub, like not as formal structure.
Yeah, GitHub is stuff, Trello is ideas.
Okay. So that's interesting. I'm glad you brought up Trello as one of your tools that you use, and kind of mentioning GitHub already, like you store your code there. One of the things I want to bring up, because I know you don't just develop games in Python, like the way I do it for my YouTube channel is very uncommon for game development. So I am hoping you can talk a little to the tools.
Scratch.
Yeah, the tools that you would use to build a game from scratch, instead of like you're not just coming in at base level with code. So like you're using different platforms and engines, and I'm hoping you can talk to that a little bit.
I'm not doing much of the low level coding.
Right.
I'm not doing much of the graphics rendering. So first of all, creating stuff from scratch is fantastic.
For fun.
That's probably my favorite class in school. We built a render engine. But yeah, so I primarily, I've branched out a little bit. Primarily what I use is, for the compiler, the renderer, the everything on that end, I use Unity, the game engine. Mainly because that takes C# scripts opposed to C++, which is what Unreal uses. Unreal Engine is the other kind of go-to for, granted, a lot of studios, but also indie devs.
And both free.
I have done some stuff in Unreal. I like it, just not as much.
Sure.
So if you're from the angle of someone from his channel looking to try your hand in this, Unreal or Unity. If you have no experience in either C# or C++, the choice is yours.
But I would say, like, if you have a background in C++, you might be more inclined to start with Unreal, whereas if you had a background in C#, you might want to start with Unity. I mean, if you had no background in either, it might not matter, but would that be fair to say?
Yeah, actually, that's a pretty good. If you have comfort with one or the other, do Unreal versus Unity. People like to say that Unreal is way better because it creates things that look better, but
Sure.
that's
I've
not
heard that.
super accurate. Out of the box, Unreal has a lot of post-processing and visual stuff that makes it look really nice. And Unity does not. It has
Really?
they've been getting there, but they're not quite there yet.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've seen like YouTube clips that are like hyper photorealistic, like Cyberpunk or Stormtroopers, and it always says like made with Unreal 5, stuff like that.
Yeah. Unreal is a fantastic render engine, and part of that is definitely because of C++. Now, I can't say the large part of it because most coding languages are a skin of another one, right? C++ is a skin of C. C# is a skin of C++.
Oh, really?
The lower, I believe so.
I hadn't heard that. I don't know why I thought C# and C++ were just different C skins.
I'm fairly confident C# is C++ with safety built in.
Cool. No, I believe you.
With safety and a lot of macros.
Makes sense.
I mean, I think I took something away from college.
Yeah, you'd hope so. So you're saying.
But the further down that chain you get, the more base you get, things do run faster. So Unreal may have a slight performance capability, but that's not going to be relevant unless you're like in the highest level of game development. Unless you're creating these massive, like 100 gigabyte games with PBR materials and photorealistic stuff, that won't be relevant.
What is PBR?
What it exactly stands for, I don't remember. It's
photo something. Can't assume I know these things, man. Photo.
I know what
realism.
an IDE is. I didn't know that it was integrated development environment until recently.
Oh yeah, you gotta know that one.
I can Google it, but PBR is like the most photorealistic things that you typically see.
Okay. All right. Well, why don't you talk a little bit about like the 3D tool?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, right. So for 3D, I use Blender. It's a fantastic tool.
A modeler.
It's free. There's a ton of resources around it. It's and more importantly, it's pretty easy to get into. A lot of tools like I tried doing something with Android Studio once, and it's incredibly overwhelming because they put you right in it and there's no explanation. Blender is easy to get into and just start making something.
Okay.
Now there's a million layers of learning on top, but it's easy to get into.
Have you have you seen like good YouTube channels or online tutorials from Blender? Like
YouTube is filled with Blender tutorials. There are a ton of resources. My personal favorite is Blender Guru.
I
mean, in case the name doesn't give it away.
No, it's
in case the name doesn't give it away, he's pretty good. Does a ton of tutorials. There's a good one, and I think I might butcher his name, but it's Sebastian Lay.
Sebastian
Lague. He does a lot of Blender into Unity.
Oh, great.
And he focuses a lot more on the code side of things. He does Blender into stuff, or he does just basic coding adventures. Like recently he did ray tracing, which he built like custom ray tracing rendering and plugged it into Unity. Cool. He's done a ton of procedural generation, a ton of simulations. He's great as well.
All right. Yeah.
So for 3D, I largely use Blender. For 2D, if you can't just draw it, like I use it's not nearby, but whenever I'm making something for 2D, if it can be hand drawn, which is my preference, I use my iPad and I draw it on there.
Oh, cool.
But if you're doing pixel art, which I know is very popular, there is a free tool. Well, Photoshop's great for that too. But if you don't have Photoshop, there's a tool called Piskel. Yeah, Piskel.
Piskel.
It is a sprite builder with a ton of tools. It's
okay.
It's great. I use it all the time.
So like you can do a sprite sheet using that?
You can make a sprite sheet, and you can either export it as PNG files, as a sprite sheet. There's a ton of options.
Okay. You said that you use your iPad for hand-drawn stuff. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because like iPads have all sorts of weird file formats. So like what app do you use? What file format do you have to export it as? Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, so that that'll depend on the software you're using. I use an app called Procreate. I think it was $5, maybe 10.
Yeah, I've used it.
But you can export those as PNGs.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you you disable the background, it'll be transparent.
Transparent background.
It works pretty reliably. That's in my upcoming video. That's pretty much how everything that's drawn, I drew it in there.
Cool. Okay. Yeah.
As for textures, because if you're making a 3D game, textures are really big. There is a website. It used to be called CC0 Textures. I think it is now Ambient CG, I want to say.
Ambient with a T or Ambient?
Ambient.
With a T.
Ambient CG. Okay. It has, at the moment, 2,100 assets.
Wow.
It's fantastic. They're high quality. They have, it's free.
And it's totally free. Nice.
It's...
Okay.
It's got color, albedo, diffuse, specular, all of the stuff you need for good-looking materials.
Awesome.
And it has pretty much everything you can imagine. As for like structures, obviously like custom people, custom terrain, stuff like that, it won't have modeled.
All right.
But it's my go-to. I use it in anything that I use textures for. If you don't want to create your own, because that's a pain.
Yeah. No. Of course it is. Okay. What about like audio?
All right. Those are a little bit worse because. While the internet is a great resource, a lot of the audio,
like sounds
either
and
you have to pay for or is horrible.
Okay.
It is impressive how many of the free sound effects are people trying to imitate it with their voice. Props for trying, but I'm not gonna get like a machine gun sound effect that someone's just going ba 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 into the microphone. Like that's not that's not what I'm looking for.
Come on, guys.
So for audio, really. Get creative if you can. If you have a microphone, like let's say you need a gunshot. For one of my games that is a long way from being done, that I won't even name the name of, I did bottle of canola oil, soup can, with a metal bowl in between them and banged them together. What? And I put a little bit of audio distortion on that, and that was my gunshot sound effect. And it sounded pretty good.
Yeah,
you gotta get creative. For example, and this is a kind of macabre example, but I'm kind of speaking from personal experience here. Let's say you're making like a Doom style game and you need the sound of like flesh tearing, Velcro, and a plunger.
What?
If you combine the sound of Velcro and a plunger being unstuck, that is exactly what it sounds like for something getting dislocated.
How?
And it is. It is.
How?
But it's.
But how do you have the thought to try to make that sound effect? How do you
dislocated my shoulder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, practical experience.
That's how I know what it sounds like.
All right, fair enough. But what about music?
Yeah, it is. But I did recreate it, and it is scarily spot on.
Okay.
So get creative. A lot of guess and check. It's going to be clap something in the microphone, listen to what it sounds like, and either be like, yep, that's good, or try again.
Okay.
Audio is very much so guess and check. And as for music, I haven't had a game where I've had music yet, much to my disappointment. But if you're not comfortable with creating your own, and that is one thing I certainly lack in,
you can do it.
There are tons of freelancer people, little indie channels on YouTube that create music, and I'm sure they'd be thrilled to make something for your game.
Yeah.
As long as you're not asking for anything too complicated, right? A lot of times they'll do it.
Well, yeah, and it might. I mean, it's if you let them play it first, right? They
right,
might,
exactly. If they're small and you're small and you're not asking for a lot, they'll probably do it pro bono for exposure.
Yeah.
If you're charging money for your game, which I don't recommend if you haven't established yourself.
Yeah.
But if you are charging money, kick a little bit of it their way as a bit of an incentive.
Yeah.
For example, one of my subscribers makes music, and I'm probably to the point of needing music. I'm considering going to him because he made some pretty good stuff. And he's been very, vocal in support of my channel. So, of course.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think your audio got a little jumbled there, but it sounded like you said you're probably going to go to one of your subscribers to make music, which is awesome. But I think that touches on a bigger point, which is like if you can create a community while you develop a game, whether that's just texting your friends about it or sharing on some topical like Reddits or just sharing with your Instagram or Facebook friends or whatever, you probably know several people who could help you with whatever you're stuck on. Or if you don't have music and you don't have anything, like you don't have the artistic knack for developing a game, reach out to whatever community you have have, because odds are those people are going to be super willing to like help you develop and might be willing to make music for you, and just reach out and see if anyone you know is already willing to do something like that.
Oh yeah,
right?
especially when you're starting out. So many of my subscribers are own indie game devs with their own channels. One of them actually just released a game, and I got it. Now, granted, this was his first game, and he charged $10 for it, which is not personally what I would have done. But hey, I bought it, so
Yeah, so I guess it worked. But I guess I should caveat, because I even mentioned like you could throw it on Reddit and try to build a Reddit community. And I think you have to be somewhat careful about that, because it's not just like talk about your game openly on Reddit. I don't necessarily know that you'll get great responses unless you find the specific subreddits of what you're talking about. Stack Overflow is terrific. I think YouTube genuinely is one of the most positive communities of all the social media platforms by far. And Reddit, maybe not so much. I've definitely, I've shared some stuff on the Pygame Reddit, and the people there love it when it's a big Pygame project that I worked really hard on, and I share the GitHub, so I'm not just trying to sell my stuff. But in general, you might not have the most luck just with pure Reddit. In my experience, Reddit needs to be used sparingly. And I think they even have the thing like, it's okay to be a Redditor with a YouTube channel, but it's not okay to be a YouTuber with a Reddit channel. And so my advice about trying to spread on Reddit is just be careful.
Yeah. I saw an interesting joke the other day. It was, whenever I need help with a coding project, I go onto Reddit and ask the question, but then I log in with a different account and put a so egregiously wrong answer in the comment, because nobody wants to, out of the goodness of their heart, answer the question, but programmers can't help themselves from fixing someone else.
That is hilarious. It's accurate.
That's a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, but it's true. I've posted before, hey, just trying to learn how to use this module. Any help would be greatly appreciated. And I'll get no responses, but I've shared some projects and they're like, why did you do it X way? Y way would have been better. And it's like, if I had posted asking you to review my code and saying looking for help, nobody would have helped. But because I was like, hey, check out this thing I built, they could not wait to overcorrect, right? So there is that to it. So one thing I do want to just circle back to really quickly, because we kind of skirted over it. Like you mentioned, you don't do much base level code. We didn't talk a ton about what that means, but you do a fair amount of coding, right? I mean, your program was essentially half game dev and half programming.
Yeah.
So can you talk to, I guess, the coding that you do have to do, what you don't have to write code for, what you do when you use an engine?
Right. What I don't have to write code for using a game engine. I don't have to, if I want a cube, right? I want a cube to look like a cube, to have shading and to fall, and to collide with another cube, maybe. If I was writing from ground up, I'd have to do everything, do all the matrix math, do the Z subdivision, the Z mask, have to figure out the points of it, do collision intersection, which is all stuff I know how to do, but it's a pain.
Kind of cool, yeah.
Using Unity, I right click and say I want a cube.
Yeah,
and it's there. And if I put a box collider on it and a rigid body, it falls and collides with other stuff.
Which
the
is
low level stuff, the rendering and the physics, is largely what's taken care of. It's kind of, to put it in an analogy, creating something from the ground up is buying a farm. It's producing the wheat, the grain, the milk, the whatever you produce on it, and sending it to the grocery store. And maybe you own the grocery store too. That's great. Using a game engine is going to the grocery store and seeing a million things that you could turn into something, and taking that stuff and building something with it.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting analogy. So you're just buying bread, milk, and flour off the shelf and baking whatever you're making, versus growing the ingredients from the ground up, and that's the game engine is the grocery store.
It's a lot of code. It doesn't create itself, Pete.
I never said it created itself. I've seen those flow charts of how to program.
All right, so here's the thing. It's funny you mentioned that, because that's the big difference between Unity and Unreal. When they say that, they're talking about visual scripting. They're talking about blueprints. They're talking about code blocks, grabbing things that have predetermined functionality and connecting them. And I hate that.
It seems easy though.
They're called blueprints, and it is a complete mockery of my profession.
It seems like the point is to make it more approachable.
It is, but I like to feel important. All right.
Okay,
that is a designer tool. Blueprint visual coding is for game design, which I know when people think of a game, they talk about game developers. It's synonymous. And they think, hey, something's broken. They're like, developers, I found a bug, yada, yada, yada. They pretty much refer to everybody on the development team as a game developer. That's not really the case.
Okay.
Developers make the tools, designers kind of stitch them together. Or designers, the way the roles are divided varies based on the company.
Right.
But largely designers are kind of the higher end idea men.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting into the weeds a little bit because I said, it changes with every company.
Yeah, I guess we don't have to dive that much into it, but it's also worth mentioning, like, depending on the company, those might not even be different roles, but like for you at school.
Oh yeah, and that's 100% correct. The smaller the team gets, the more all-encompassing your job will be. If you're working for like a 5-10 man studio, or if you're working by yourself, you have to wear a lot of hats. But if you're at a bigger company like Activision, you're like, okay, you make the physics for the horse's testicles, and that is the one thing you do.
What?
Family friendly. Hey, listen, I'm pretty sure the man who designed that for Red Dead Redemption missed like his daughter's wedding or something to keep working on that.
Is that a thing?
I didn't just pull that out of the air.
Okay, I'm actually glad that you didn't pull that out of the air, because I was worried about where that came from. But I think that's an important note too, especially because a lot of the people who might be watching this looking to get from pure programming into programming plus game development might be thinking like, well, do I want to be more of a developer or more of a designer? And I think what you've just explained is that if you're going to be working on an indie game or on a very small team, you don't have to worry too much about that distinction, because you will be both. Right. If you're building your own game, like, you're going to be both roles. So you'll be doing all the rendering, you'll be game developing, game designing, you'll be writing and debugging the code. And there's always pieces that you would rather not do. You'd prefer to have a team member who would do that as their specialty, but you should be prepared to do all of the roles, I think is fair to say. But so then I think another thing, if you are developing as an indie game developer, as a small team, small timer, so how do you know when a project is done enough? Because I've never finished a Python project that I couldn't add more functionality to, but at some point I have to ship it.
From there's kind of two approaches to that. From a personal satisfaction, from a personal pride standpoint,
sure,
I don't think you'll ever be satisfied, right? Especially not if it's your concept. If it's your idea that you made, you'll always want it to be perfect. But perfection isn't really something you can reach, right? It's something you have to chase, but it's not something you can reach. You'll never be satisfied.
But in the world of game dev, you can patch things, right? Bug fix at later down the road, like ship a non-finished product.
We live in a world where games aren't really complete when you sell them anymore,
which is ridiculous.
Bothers me.
Yeah, of course.
But that's a different conversation. From a technical, from a how well it will sell standpoint, you need to get it tested, because you would not believe the number of bugs. You'd think making a game that the number of times you test it while making it, you would run into every bug imaginable.
I guess,
not the case. It's like the first thing they teach you when designing a game, but assume the player, and without being condescending at all, it is assume that the player is the stupidest person imaginable.
Okay.
You will think you made the clearest path forward. You could put big flashing red arrows and they will go the other direction.
Okay, but
you have to assume they will break it.
But there are some people that play the game with that in mind. I mean, I had friends in college when Destiny 2 dropped. They were like looking for spots where they could phase through like the walls, and it's like almost Easter egg hunting. Like, they were trying to break the game. They spent so many hours playing the game. They were trying to break the game, right? So they weren't
trying to break it. Well,
they weren't just stupid, is what I'm saying. I think it's a funnier way to put it is like assume the person playing is the dumbest person you've ever met. But some people will get frustrated and play the game wrong. But some people are out there trying to break your game, like as for fun, right? Like you.
Yeah. Now it's
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that because you are right. There are a considerable number of people, I'm honestly kind of one of them, that tries to break games.
Of course you
But
are.
the important thing that you have to consider is how does it come across to that person? If the person is trying to break your game and they do so successfully, they will not be as upset as someone who is genuinely trying to enjoy your game and gets confused.
Okay, so that's a good distinction, that like an Easter egg hunter who breaks your game is not frustrated. They're not going to leave.
They can't be angry about it.
They're not going to leave a bad review. They were trying to break your game. They managed to, and honestly, that was the point of what they were doing, and so they're thrilled by it. That's where like the line between Easter egg and glitch actually is straddled. But what you're talking about with testing, that's super important prior to shipping a game, is getting it in the hands of a beta audience and an alpha or beta test audience who was not involved in the development of the game, are not necessarily pro gamers who will get every dynamic that you set out, and try to get a lot of people testing your game to search for things that could potentially go wrong, that you were like, well, I don't have to plan for that because no one would ever do that in my game. That's more.
And that's largely, I think that right there is largely the difference between your content and mine. I make stuff that's supposed to be fun and enticing with a little bit of the technical aspect because, that's what's interesting about it, is how the sausage is made, although that's not supposed to be how that saying is used.
Yeah, okay. Some people like watching sausage get made. That's
some people like how the sausage is made, I guess. But it's technical, it's interesting, but at the end of the day, you're showing off what you've made.
Yeah.
And that gets people excited to play it.
Yeah.
Not to recreate it, although it does, certainly. The big part of the indie game dev scene is inspiring other people to do so. But they want to play what you've made.
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
Yeah.
And
no, it's a very fair point. But okay, so I think an important one to talk about is, all right, you've decided to ship it, you've tested and played it with a large enough audience that you do feel ready to kind of put it out in front of people. Where do you roll that out as an indie game developer? I mean, I'm familiar with itch.io and Steam. I'm guessing those are maybe what you've used.
What the
like you
pretty common one for...
You used itch.io?
Yeah. I've used... So these platforms that you rolled out on have pretty distinct tiers, right? You have itch, and then you have Steam. Itch is free to upload, and you can make some money, but most of it is free and accepting donations. Steam, you have to pay $100 to put it on there. If they greenlight it, then you can publish it. There is the Google Play Store, which I think is $25 to either upload per app or for the license, which I have because I've...
Which is for Android?
That's for Android, for Samsung.
And I believe it works on Windows, right? I think Windows computers can access the Google Play Store through Chrome?
Maybe with an emulator.
Not...
I don't think they can do it natively.
Okay. No, I believe you.
I could be mistaken because...
No, you might be right. I thought I'd seen apps...
Yeah, it's the App Store equivalent, and then there's the App Store for iOS, which is... It's the same thing with itch and Steam. iOS has way more reach, at least here in the West, than Google Play does. So if you want it on the App Store, it's going to reach more people.
Sure.
Unfortunately, you have to pay $100 to upload something to the App Store. You also need like a website dedicated to it. You need an Apple developer's ID, which is way harder to get.
Yeah. Hoops.
More hoops, but more potential benefit. It's all
but
about...
also with the App Store, there's way more apps on there.
Right, exactly.
So the odds of your app naturally floating to the top, even though you've made a high quality app, is actually, I would say, a little lower without a ton of advertising because of that.
Exactly. And from an indie game developer standpoint, it is very enticing to try to put your product onto the Steam or onto the Apple Store, because it feels real, right? If you put something onto there, you feel like I am a published game developer on Steam. Yeah. I do not recommend doing that because, for starters, it is a waste of money. If you are not making money and you are an indie game developer, just the amount of money you spend versus the reach it's going to generate, unless you've made a really fantastic game, is probably not worth it. Same thing with the App Store.
If you've made a fantastic game, that's where itch.io could potentially make you a good amount of money still, because you can charge on that, correct?
Right, exactly. Right? If you blow up on itch, exactly. Even if you make your game free with donations, or you have a Patreon or anything, if you make something fantastic, you will get money. There will be some people out there who will be like, "This is a good product. I'm just support the developer." It's
No, people
if
want
you make something
to.
good, the people will come. Basically.
Agreed. I mean, I'm blown away by the fact that three people who I'm super grateful for want to support my channel on Patreon. I don't even roll out cool games, so I definitely think make a quality game. Don't worry about the money. But if we just saved you, if Southpaw Development and LeMaster Tech just saved you hundreds of dollars, consider finding my Patreon link down below to say thank you for saving us the
That's
money.
a good point.
Right?
That's a good point, right? Yeah. Include in a message if Patreon lets you do that. Specify that you want the money to go to me instead of him.
Okay. Yeah, when you subscribe to my Patreon for saving you from the iOS store and Steam $100 fee, you can say you
Half
want
of it is
to
for Southpaw Development in perpetuity. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, perpetuity. The man's greedy. He's been watching Shark Tank. No, it's a good opportunity for a quick plug, which is just consider subscribing to my channel, consider subscribing to Southpaw Development, leave a like on the video. It helps us out a ton. That is how small-time creators grow. It really helps. But okay, so I think another good thing for us to talk about, maybe a little more fun, a little more interesting for you. Tell us about some of the biggest projects that you've done, what people can find, not just on your YouTube channel, but the sort of things that as a game developer you've done and you've been engaged by, and things that you've enjoyed building, what sort of the process was, what led you to make that in the first place. And then, just talk a little bit about that maybe.
All right. So the biggest thing I think is a little bit of a segue that would appeal to your viewers is that I made a level renderer, a proper, very base down level renderer using C++ and DirectX 11, which is a lot closer to actual hardware than Unity, something like that. I had to do all of the whole rendering vertices, drawing triangles, importing mesh data, stuff like that, lighting, everything. It was a pain. I barely passed, but I did it.
Can you say just a little bit more about like what a level renderer is?
Yeah. So it create an environment essentially.
Okay.
It's
create an environment.
What we did for ours specifically is we had a little in-between file that you could make a scene in Blender and convert it to vertex data, which was just raw, like it says, these are the vertices that make up this object, and then there was a matrix for each one of those objects that was how they'd be placed in the game world. And you had to take that, and all of our code was reading in that data and plotting the vertices, drawing triangles between them, accessing like the GPU and the hardware, the actual memory on the computer, and having it transfer between CPU and GPU and all that. Wow. Actually getting the computer to render it in just we were using Visual Studio in just a Visual Studio project window.
Okay.
And then there was, all of the complicated math with a lot of linear algebra, which is horrible.
It is funny it's funny how many programmers despise math.
I love math. Like, I hate linear algebra. Calculus, physics, fair. I love it. Linear algebra is
Okay, fair distinction. All right. Okay. Well,
I don't think so. I made a YouTube video about a text
YouTube video about the level renderer.
That was the only other school project. Okay, mine was 3.5 minutes long.
I also made a video about text adventure.
Yeah. I don't think that one 30, that one was publicly available, but it's broken at the moment. So it's not currently available. As for what is available, if we're talking actual published projects, I have a PC game and I have a mobile game.
Yeah.
The PC game I made for Game Jam. And if you're unfamiliar with what a Game Jam is,
Dungeon Faller.
It is like a 2-day, a 3-day, or sometimes up to a week-long event where someone online, usually after some rounds of voting, will give out a theme, and you have that much time to make a game that lines up with that theme. And then afterwards you submit it, people play, people review, people vote on it.
And this specifically was Ludum Dare.
Exactly.
Like,
so this one was called Ludum Dare,
right?
or Ludum Dare, however you pronounce it. It routinely has thousands of submissions. It happens like 3 times a year. I came in like 400 out of 4,000, which I thought was pretty good for my first game. But the theme for this one was deeper and deeper. So I made a combination of a dungeon crawler and Plinko and called it Dungeon Faller because I am extremely creative. And yes,
that is some fun. That's some
that
pottery.
one is available on my itch.io. Good segue. I believe I'm also Southpaw Development on there, so if you look me up, you'll be able to find it.
Yeah.
It's mostly bug free.
Yeah, and I'll put a link to it in the description as well under your YouTube page. So we'll just put links down there to the projects that we talk about in this video as well, just to spread the word.
And as for my mobile game, it's on the App Store or the Google Play Store, not the App Store. Important distinction.
Yep.
We covered that.
Yep.
That is called Radius. It's a very simple mobile game. You're on a platform, it shrinks, and you roll a cube around and try to avoid bombs.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
And attentive viewers will note that I got the names of both of those correct, as well as where they were published. That's some good older brother points. And okay, so other projects?
Yeah. Outside of stuff that I've just stuff that I've actually published, stuff you'll find on my channel is I think 3 of my videos are about Radius actually. But and one of them is for Dungeon Faller. But other than that, I made a space dogfight game, which I really liked. But it's just I don't know nearly enough about AI, and that's the point that I got to in development, where I need to make an enemy AI.
And that was
the
one where you were gonna. Part of it was you were in space in your ship doing the dogfight, and then you were gonna get out of the ship and like take us. Yeah.
And then take the ship, yeah. And I still absolutely love that idea.
Yeah.
Like, you take the ship, there's, like, anti-ship weapons on there. It's fantastic. There's hard points you have to capture in space. And I know I'm not the first game to do that.
No, it's awesome.
But I loved that idea. It's just, I have to make... I'd have to make a AI for enemies on the ship and flying in space, and they'd have to have objectives and everything, and it's just... It's a lot.
It's a lot. No, that's fair. Yeah, okay.
And that's what it's all about, yeah. I made a text adventure, which we don't really have to go into. It's just a text adventure.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with the text adventure, but I also made a text adventure, and of all the projects that I've done and you've done, that one probably the closest, right?
Difference.
Yeah.
I did actually, so this is fun, but I don't have it publicly available because I didn't quite get the networking down right. In my networking class, I made a multiplayer text adventure, which kind of ran similar to like a D&D campaign style. Mm-hmm. It was a great idea, but networking is so painful.
Yeah, doing anything network hosted, multiplayer hosted is a massive pain in the butt. That's one thing. People will comment on some of my Python projects. They're like, "Oh, this should be multiplayer."
Hard, as it turns out.
Yeah, it's really hard. Sometimes I'm like, "Trust me, I hear you guys. I read every comment. I'm trying. It's not that simple." And also, I'm self-taught, so like these are things that I have to go to Stack Overflow and try to figure out. But okay, so you also have melee combat, 2 videos about it.
So my favorite game of all time would be Shadow of Mordor, which if you're unfamiliar with it, it's like the Batman games with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, the Arkham
games.
It's
awesome.
Yeah.
The Arkham Batman games with Lord of the Rings, yeah. And I love the combat in that. It feels so good to do. And I wanted to recreate something like that. Once again, ridiculously complicated, but the first video absolutely blew up. No idea why, because it honestly was not one of my best videos, in my opinion. And I don't have that many videos. And then the second one, which I thought was great, has like 200 views. So I don't know, man.
Yeah, I mean, I've made a few more videos than you have, but that is YouTube. Like, that's the algorithm. My most watched video.
That's your most watched video, isn't it?
Yeah, how to read from a text file in Python. I made it because I was sick, and so I couldn't make the longer video that I had planned that week, so I just rolled that one out, and it is my most watched video, and I don't know why. I've done such big, cool projects, and sometimes the algorithm squashes big projects and shuttles forward, what you would consider mediocre.
Yep.
But you know what? That's like the life of being a creator. I have no complaints about YouTube. They're very fair revenue wise to their creators. They do more than 50% of ad revenue goes to the creators on YouTube, and that's way more than any other platform. So no complaints about YouTube, other than sometimes I make a cool video and nobody watches it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen a couple people who have been like, how does this man only have like 400 subscribers? And I'm like, I agree with you, but then I click on the channel and they haven't subscribed to me. And that's, I'm like,
yeah. No, that's a good point too. It's like you're the problem,
like
you know,
people like you.
commenting.
Yeah.
Yeah. People comment like, "Oh, this video should have way more views. This channel should have way more subscribers." And it's like, "Did you share this video with anybody? Did you tell them to watch it? Are you even subscribed to my channel?" And a lot of people are, and we're grateful for every single one of them. But it's like the comment of, "How does this channel not way bigger?" It's like, well, you could do more. Okay, so I think another thing that we need to discuss is in a less than ideal world, let's say, where you are given some tasks that you're not 100% stoked about, or you're even indie game developing, or you're working on a big Python or programming project, and there are going to be aspects and elements of what you have to work on that you're not initially as enthusiastic about. Like coming up with the original idea and the first couple days of development are just like a dream come true, right? But then things get kind of hard. As a game developer, how do you kind of dig within yourself to do the things you don't want to do because you know they're essential to a project?
So there's a good balance to be found, right? If you are extremely creative and you're working on a project and it wasn't your idea, try to appreciate the creative aspects of it. If you can't, then try to find something you like about it. But if you're more technical, if you're a programmer from the ground up, take something in that project and remember why you started programming in the first place. Because you wanted to make something. Because you wanted to build something with code and have somebody else enjoy it or to see it as an end result. Take some small asset, even if it is the smallest part of the project you are working on, and make it the best you possibly can. That way, no matter what product at the end of the day, no matter how poorly your teammates performed, no matter how much you look at that project and you be like, man, this thing is a piece of crap and I'm sad my name is on it, you can look at that one small piece you worked on and you can go, damn, that is a good piece of software that I made.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. Right.
No, absolutely.
Because there's nothing more important in continuing programming than your own personal confidence and pride in what you make. So make what you make the best thing you can.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, no, that's the most important. Your name is going on that. That's part of your professional or independent, career resume.
Right.
And the thing is, like, you are going to find elements no matter what field you're in. Even if you're at your dream job, there will be parts of that dream job you don't want to do. If it's a program that you decide you wanted to make and write the code for, there's still going to be elements in there that you don't want to do.
Nobody wants to bug fix.
No one wants to bug fix. Yeah, so like you're going to hit a point where there's a part of your required work, even if you're working for yourself and you're doing an indie project, where you're not going to want to power through, but you have to. Your name is going on that. And like George said, you just have to find something in that project that reminds you why you're doing it and glom onto that piece and focus on that piece a little bit.
Nothing makes a better product than passion. You look at all of the AAA games today, and they're cold nothing. They're clearly just, maybe there's people on the team that was really into the idea, but more often it's a combination of some political message mixed with people who want to make money, and they're using games as a medium for it. I mean, my goodness. Forspoken.
Okay, so on that front, I think it's actually a good question. As a game developer, you're obviously pretty active in playing games as well. Of all the games currently out, I'd say Diablo 4 is like the only one in the last few years.
Diablo 4 is pretty good.
Yeah, that got me like excited. Like I started playing it and I was like, oh, this is a pretty good game. It looks awesome. The story's pretty good. The multiplayer is actually pretty fun. Of course, they've already slipped into the like seasonal pass thing.
Everything in the world today is a battle pass, and that makes me disappointed.
Yeah,
you and I are from the days of Halo Reach, of that system. Man, I love that customization system.
Buy a game and play it forever. Get your upgradables and your unlockables and show people stuff. But there's some hope in the games world. There's still video games people are playing and loving. So for you personally, what games are you seeing right now that still get you excited about the industry and the direction it's heading, I guess?
All right, let's think. There's three. And I won't dig too deep into all of them. But
Okay.
first and foremost, and I want to make a massive shout out to this, is that there is an indie game called Faith. It is a 8-bit style horror game about
cool
demon possession. And it is terrifying.
Yeah.
And it is a really well-written, deep story.
Wow.
It is made by one man, I believe, and he produced, and it is classic like indie developer story. He made a first chapter for it years ago that was short. It had like 5 endings, it had a couple of scares. It was great.
Nice.
A second chapter in this in-between time that was longer, seeing what he could do because the first chapter had popularity. And then this third chapter that came out either this year or at the end of last year that is so incredibly long with so many things that you can work into and really dig deep. It is fantastic. Wow. It's on Steam. It's called Faith, the Unholy Trinity. Awesome. If you have $15 to spare, I would recommend buying it.
Okay, $15. And yeah, I'll put a link to that as well. I mean, if we talked about it in this video, as long as I don't forget while I'm editing the video, I'll put links to everything down there below, all the other things.
Number 2, in a similar vein, is Inscription. That one's a lot more popular. It's also an indie game, I believe. It's like I mentioned earlier, it's inspiration for one of my games. It's a card battling game at baseline, but there's so much more to it than that. It's also very good. I also highly recommend that.
Cool.
It's
all right.
I can't really say much more about it without spoiling anything, so I'll leave it at that for that one.
Okay. No pressure. All right. We'll keep
and
it secret.
As for games that get me excited about the future, it's like the classic example, but the new Call of Duty Modern Warfare campaigns have been consistently very, very good.
Cool.
And I draw a distinction because the Modern Warfare campaigns, I don't know who they let write those, but they clearly keep them and whoever writes like Call of Duty Vanguard in like separate buildings. Okay. Because these Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2, and actually the third one's coming out in November, which I am 100% going to buy, have been so good. They've been re-envisaging, they've been a remake, of the original Modern Warfare games, which were also fantastic.
Agreed.
But they've been new, they've been fresh, they've been somewhat accurate to the source material, and they've been just consistently good. And you haven't seen that really anywhere in AAA. Like, all of the AAA games I can think of recently that have been good have been remakes of originals. And while this kind of is too, it's using original characters with a new story. But like, still, other than that, unique. The most popular game this year was Resident Evil 4. Again.
So when you say AAA, you're talking about just like big established game studios, correct?
Yeah, I don't think there's an official like line that you cross that makes you AAA. AAA is just the largest, like the Activision, the Blizzard,
okay,
the
so
Microsoft.
It's just essentially like the body of game development out there. Okay, so cool. I think one thing we should touch on, because everything we've talked about has been basically desktop and computer hosted, is the world of console, PlayStation and Xbox a completely different world for developers?
So, yes and no. It's entirely different. Steam, everything we've discussed is not applicable to console.
Okay.
Well, from the publisher standpoint, they are their own publishers. Xbox and PlayStation are their own publishers. And since you're making something for hardware, more than just a consumer, there are some steps you have to go through. You know how...
Like extra hoops to jump through? Or...
They're going to save a mute button. You know how every time you start an Xbox or a PlayStation game, there's pages upon pages of stuff with trademarks about how PlayStation and their controllers and yada yada?
Yeah.
You have to be very, very specific about what is being used and what trademarks you have to adhere to. They are very meticulous on that.
Sure. So, like, if you were an indie game developer with something on Steam, that might not be a great platform for you. There's more hoops.
Right, because they run natively on that device, right? With Xbox, there's a lot more moving parts. There's a controller, there's subscriptions, they have their own internet services, stuff like that, whereas phones and computers don't.
Yeah.
But if, let's say, you're making a game that doesn't have a subscription service, that doesn't use the Xbox Gold or the PlayStation Plus, you're just making a game for those devices.
Okay.
After you get through the whole trouble with the copyrights for the controllers and the system and all that, you have to get reviewed by them.
Yeah, okay.
similar to you do with Steam or anything else.
That makes sense.
But other than that, I believe there's all you have to do is meet some hardware specifications because, of course, they're different hardware.
Yeah.
It's not much different.
Okay.
I don't know about the cost to do that. I haven't looked into how expensive it would be to get one or the other.
Yeah.
I know they are more picky than Steam or itch.
Yeah. Well, I guess that makes sense too. They're not as established, and people are developing on computer and then rolling it out on a console. So
Right.
Yeah.
I know they're more picky, but I know they are
still open to it.
There's a fair few indie projects. It's interesting because that's still a medium that has discs, and PCs essentially don't anymore.
Well, you can you can download a lot straight on.
Oh
the
yeah,
console.
and that's what I'm saying, because you'll never see an indie game. You'll never see like a in development game as a hard disk in a store. But if you go through the PlayStation or the Xbox shop, there's a lot of in progress titles there made by small people. So it leads me to believe that if you really want to make a game for Xbox, you can do it.
Yeah.
I just haven't looked into it. A lot of times that comes from people wanting to have an experience on a controller. And given that you can hook controllers up to computers,
controllers aren't exclusive.
It's a little bit of a workaround.
Okay.
But I don't think it's that much more difficult.
Yeah, so fair enough. I mean, you've only developed for computer, so you know about it, but haven't done it.
Right. Personally, I haven't looked into it that much, but we did learn about it a bit.
Okay. And we should say I haven't given him too much prep for this, but I want to ask you about your favorite indie games. So as an indie game developer, you also play indie games and you support other indie games.
Like favorite indie game.
Yeah. So like a small team is fine too. It doesn't have to be one person. It could be a couple people.
Or a small team.
Yeah. So, but still, your favorite indie games that are on the marketplace or that you've seen that kind of inspire you about like how small teams can still make big projects. And I know I didn't prep you.
I'm not prepared for this. I would probably say personally, it's called Ravenfield. Cool. It is a first-person shooter that's kind of a sandbox combination of Battlefield and Call of Duty. It's made by one person. It's been in development for like 8 years.
Wow.
And this man has been consistently updating it throughout the course of that time. It started out just as like stick figures, basically, but they were cubes.
Yeah.
Shooting each other with like 4 guns on one map. And now it's to the point where he started adding story missions and a campaign recently, and just the dedication to it has been something that's inspired me a ton with my stuff. It's made in Unity and C#, so of course, I'm a little partial there.
Sure.
But it's a combination. Oh, I believe it's still one person. Now, what's big on Ravenfield is that in addition to being a really good base game, it's really easy to mod. There's a massive community for it. For example, I think one of the mods I have installed is an assault couch. So instead of the normal vehicles, there'd be a couch that you can get 5 guys on, and it just flies around the map.
And still just one guy?
It's fantastic.
As far as you know?
But there's a million mods.
Wow.
It has a fantastic community, and I think the combination of just the developer's passion for it and the fact that he's making a pretty good product is really what makes it so significant to me. It's it lacks a lot of polish because, like I said, it's been in development for a while. It's one man, and he's doing something pretty ambitious, but it is it's very fun, and there's a lot there.
Well, and with one person, do you expect that much polish?
Yeah, me neither.
I never polish anything.
Outside of that, I'd just like to shill Inscription again because it is a fantastic game.
Sure.
That and Faith.
I talked about those.
But as far as like favorite down to the core indie game, I'd say Ravenfield, which is also on Steam.
Cool.
So, or if you don't want to pay for it, he does have a demo version from like 5 years ago available for free if you want to see how it started.
That's a smart business move, I guess, as an indie developer.
Right.
So, okay, I guess then a good thing to do, I want to throw 3 out there. The first one, I believe, is called Stardew Valley, and I think it was just one person.
Yep, one person.
And yeah, that one's like it's like a farming simulator, Animal Crossing type.
It's like a life simulator.
Yeah,
with farming.
A life simulator with some farming, and that's just one person. And there's a great YouTube video like building Stardew Valley.
I love Stardew Valley.
Over like 8 years, like one person built this game over 8 years. So that one's awesome. I think people should check it out. Second one, a lot of people have heard of this now. Cuphead is pretty big.
I think so. Fun fact, that one was made in Unity, I believe.
Okay. So Cuphead,
so.
which I think was like two brothers, and then eventually they brought on someone to help with like art and music. There's like a documentary on YouTube about it. But that one's amazing, and mostly I think because of the style, right, and the music.
Because the style is just what you think of when you think Cuphead.
Yeah, right. I mean, the mechanic of the game is okay. I mean, it is fun. I've played it, but the style and the old-timey retro feel is just awesome. And then the third one is one called Shovel Knight, which I think is somewhat popular as a platformer.
I don't think I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's like a run and gun. Well, not really gun because your main weapon is a shovel, but it's got such a vintage retro feel. And I believe that was one person who made the original. They might have a team now. But it's super fun, really cool. There's a bunch of characters and stuff now. And I thought Shovel Knight was a ton of fun as well. But I think to start bringing this conversation home, one of the most important takeaways I'd say from this conversation is there are some really big, ambitious projects out there that one person or small teams were able to put together. So if you feel like you have a huge idea for a game or a project that might seem like more than you can take on right now, just get started because you can do it. People have done this, and you don't have to be the next Cuphead or Shovel Knight or Stardew Valley or Inscription, right? Like,
I think the most important takeaway would be if you're from LeMaster Tech and you're excited about game development, it's
programmer types.
An important way to look at it, and it's easy to slip into, but you have to check yourself, is you need to want to do this. You need to want to make a game because of the product you want to create.
Yeah.
You don't want to...
Like end result.
Your motivation can't be you want to have created a product. It needs to be you want to make something. You can't want to be the guy that's super successful that made a successful game.
Yeah.
You want to currently be that guy that's making a successful game.
Right. Not picturing...
That's the difference.
Yeah.
And
not picturing yourself as a millionaire with a successful game.
Yeah.
Picturing yourself as a game developer making this prototype that you've always wanted to make. It's like the stereotype of it's about the journey, not the destination, which, it's a stereotype, but...
Yeah. You can want to be done with the project, but purely because you want to see the end result.
Yeah.
Other than that, you need to love making it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. And also just start small. I have the same issue. I drastically overscope my projects. The only ones I finished are super simple and small.
Yeah.
Start small.
Yeah.
And get bigger as you get better.
No, and that's true even with the Python projects that we do on the channel. Some of my first big like Pygame games I look back on now, and
I think that applies to pretty much anything.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Not just Python, not just game development. That's life, right? If you're trying to learn new skill, an instrument, anything, don't think of your final project that you want to someday be able to make as the only thing you're ever going to make on your journey to develop these skills and stuff. And I do think one of the most common things is you take on a huge project and you do the sections you're excited about first, and then you kind of run into a wall of burnout maybe.
Burnout will happen.
Yeah.
It
happens to everybody. And like getting started is the important part, not finishing, right? I mean,
specifically, if you want to get started with game development in Unity, there's a channel called Brackies. He's unfortunately no longer posting, but he has every tutorial series you can imagine.
Great.
He's fantastic. He has one that is a endless runner, which is make your first game in Unity. It's great. It's simple. It is cubes moving on a platform, but it's 3D and it's an endless runner, and it's start to finish a full game.
No, that's great. And I don't think you have to be an active posting channel. If you've done series of tutorials that are still applicable and still helpful, I really do think that's enough that you can go find that channel. So Brackies, starting with YouTube tutorials is great. And so like I think an important takeaway is that if you're only in it for financial gain, that's not a good enough resource. But if you do something great, it'll work out.
Yeah, and this shouldn't be the driving force.
Of course.
Between you and me, if you are one person and you make a really successful game, that gets a lot of money.
Yeah.
Because these studios that make really good games bring in millions of dollars, they're also spending millions of dollars.
On huge teams.
If you make a really successful game with your like $600 computer and free tools and you get like thousands of dollars from that, that's all yours.
Yeah, and it's probably, since we're doing the zoom in, it's worth mentioning if you make a mediocre game, you don't have to blow up. If you get 100 people to spend $10, that's a lot of money.
If you make an unsuccessful game, you're a failure.
No, that is not the
just-
message.
If you
It's you don't have to be the one in a million. If you make something fun and entertaining that few people get value out of.
actually, you want a good example? My mobile game has earned me $1.03 at this point.
Yeah.
And I am thrilled.
Of course.
I can't collect that money. I can't collect it until it makes $100, which at this pace I will be long dead before that happens.
Yeah.
But
well, not after this. It's gonna. So many people are gonna go download Radius.
oh yeah.
No, your point is that like it's just numbers on a screen, but it's so encouraging to see people using
But
it.
still,
Yeah.
that $1, which essentially is just a number on a screen for me because I can't even collect it, is still probably the most gratifying thing I have ever seen.
Yeah.
Because that is
It's real.
money that something I have made has produced.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing thing to see because at the end of the day you're making a product. I haven't made a dime off of YouTube.
Yeah.
In this next video, I've probably put more work into it than I have any of my development projects, and there's no code associated with it. And it's I really hope it performs well, but I'm doing it because I'm passionate about the subject.
Of course.
So
of course. Well, I should probably get back to the newborn and help the wife out, and we should probably land the plane here.
Probably, yeah.
But
and I, of course, have a very busy schedule. Yes,
of course, indie new game developer, recently graduated Southpaw Development. Thank you so much for your time. All jokes aside, it is a lot of work to collaborate across time zones, and we both do have a lot going on. So I do really appreciate George's time. I hope all of my viewers found a lot of value in the things he said. Consider checking out his channel. It is a lot of fun. I might be biased, but I think it's a lot of fun, and it'll be really cool to see projects that he rolls out. I'd love to toss it over to George for a closing statement. Real quick, I just want to throw out there, if you're watching this video or if you've watched any of my past videos or George's past videos and you want to do something independent, you want to do something for yourself, build it yourself, get after a project that you've always had your eyes set on, you know, I am so big a fan of yours already because everybody who tries to do something on their own, break out of the mold is so cool. So I actually started my YouTube channel just because I wanted to continue learning, continue challenging myself. So that's sort of my closing statement. I'd like to, George, give us some closing thoughts if you don't mind.
Yeah, all right. Well, closing thought. You know, in addition to what you were saying, I'm super grateful for this. I won't pretend that my audience is larger than yours.
It doesn't matter. Size isn't that important.
But as far as the interest, I know a lot of your fans had in bringing me on in the first place.
Yeah, several. Yeah.
As far as actual ideas, as far as the start of the creative cycle, it's easy to get discouraged because, you know, you're from a point where you haven't made anything and you look around at everything that is made and you don't see the hours that went into that. You don't see the years that
You're
went
just
into
holding
that.
the product.
So it's easy to get discouraged and feel like you'll never make something like that. But ultimately, I think most people are probably more creative than they give themselves credit for.
I'd agree with that.
And if you want to make something, try to make it. And more importantly, and it may seem counterintuitive, I guarantee you your first idea will not be as fun as you thought it was, and it will not work out.
Yeah, probably true.
Mine didn't. Most of mine
None
still
of mine
don't.
have. Yeah.
But you got to do it. And that does not mean you failed. That means you improved. As long as you take that. And honestly, what I recommend is if you make your first idea and you're like, wow, this isn't fun, make it again and try to change something.
Yeah.
Reiterate on the same idea. Or, and what you'll probably notice is while you're doing that, some other idea will creep into your head because creativity creates more creativity. Some other idea will creep into your head. You'll try to make that and slowly you will improve.
That's really good.
Start small. Trust yourself. Go for it. And if it doesn't work out, just do it again. Because it won't work out. 99% of the time, it won't work out. Most shipped products have a lot of stuff that still doesn't work out.
That is true. That is true.
There's a difference between something not being what you hoped it for and stagnation and not improving.
Yeah.
Right? The important part is improving. It's you know, it's cliche, but it's about the journey, not the end result. The product is, you know, the seal of approval. It's you getting to sit back and say, I made that. Yeah. But if you didn't put any work into it, what's the point of making something, right? If something came easy, everyone would do it.
Yeah, and there's such a thing as like pride of the makers, you know, putting your name on something.
Ultimately, ultimately, it's not to put your name on something and be proud of it. It's not about you getting it right. It's about how long you worked on it before you got it right.
Yeah, the hustle, the struggle.
And I think, that's deep and meaningful, I know, but I think that ultimately it's more rewarding the more work you put into it. So if you fail, and you will, don't get discouraged. Just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And trust yourself.
Yeah, trust yourself. It is about the journey. It's not the destination. It might be a cliche, but that's because...
Cliches for a reason, right?
Yes, every cliche comes from a reason. It got said so many times because there's some truth to it. I just want to reiterate, like, I'm not the only one out there. Everybody that I've chatted with on YouTube, other than a few bitter people, are so happy to see people pursuing their passions, doing something they're interested in. I know both of us on the call would be happy to talk about it.
If you have an exciting idea, by all means, hit either of us up.
Yeah, I mean, I read every comment. I know George reads every comment, I think.
Yeah.
And so if there's something you're like, hey, I'm working on this, check out this, GitHub or itch.io link. I might not buy every game that someone sends me a link for. You've got two fans right here on this call. So George, unless you have anything else to add, I think I'll just close with...
no, I think I've talked myself out.
Okay. I think I'll just close with thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope this was useful and informative and what you were looking for. I'm sure if a lot of people enjoyed this and if there's another round of questions, we could have him back on. He'd definitely be willing to rejoin, at least until he makes his first super successful indie game that blows up, and then
well, hey, you know what? I'll be sure to remember you when I'm at the top. Yeah.
That's darn generous of you. But okay, to close, thank you everybody so much for watching. Good luck with everything you're working on. Massive thank you to my Patreon supporters. Don't forget to check out the links in the description below. See you next time.
Later, everybody.
Bye.